For decades, Howard Lutnick ran Cantor Fitzgerald on Wall Street. Today, he's the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and this year, his old firm, now run by his own sons, landed a lead role raising private capital for a company his department just backed with up to $1.6 billion in federal support. This is the story of USA Rare Earth, a company that went from a small development stage player to a fully funded strategic platform, almost overnight after the Commerce Department stepped in. The question isn't whether the U.S. needs a domestic rare earth supply chain. Nearly everyone agrees it does. The question is who ends up profiting from how that supply chain gets built. In January 2026, the administration announced a tentative package worth up to $1.6 billion for USA rare earth grants, loans, and a federal equity stake, reported at roughly 10%, though some congressional letters put the government's position as high as 16%, depending on how the warrants are structured. To close the deal, USA Rare Earth also raised about $1.5 billion in private capital. The firm it picked to lead that fundraising was Cantor Fitzgerald, the investment bank Howard Lutnick ran for decades before he joined the cabinet, now chaired by his son Brandon, with his other son Kyle in senior leadership. Nobody seriously disputes that the U.S. should be building out its own rare earth and critical mineral supply chains. Reporting and congressional statements agree on that much. The actual issue is narrower. Did this specific structure allow a cabinet secretary's family firm to collect fees on a transaction that secretary's own department substantially enabled? Senator Elizabeth Warren asked USA Rare Earth's CEO directly why the company picked the Commerce Secretary's family firm for the placement role. The company's answer, as reported, was that its, quote, best move was to go with the team who knew us, unquote, pointing to a relationship with Cantor that predated Lutnick's time in government. Cantor Fitzgerald has defended its role by saying the commercial relationship with USA Rare Earth predates Lutnick joining the administration, and that it had no role in negotiating USAR's arrangements with the federal government. That may address part of the optics problem. What it doesn't resolve is whether Commerce officials, including Lutnick himself, were properly screened from decisions that could materially benefit the bank his sons now run. Before landing the government-backed package, USA Rare Earth was seen as a relatively small, development stage player, not a fully integrated industrial champion. After the federal commitment and the private financing came through, the company moved fast. Acquisitions and operating deals in Brazil, the United Kingdom, and France. That speed matters because government participation changes how investors price risk. Once Commerce is willing to fund, lend to, and sit on the cap table of a company, outside investors tend to treat it as politically de-risked, which makes it easier to raise money, buy assets, and expand internationally. USA Rare Earth doesn't stand alone. The New York Times reported that USA Rare Earth is part of a larger network of projects where the Trump family and the Lutnick family have ties to at least 14 companies pursuing roughly $8.9 billion in federal support for critical minerals. The same reporting named Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump as participants in mining ventures, including a tungsten project in Kazakhstan expected to benefit from major U.S. support. Brandon and Kyle Lutnick, meanwhile, are tied through Cantor Fitzgerald to deal-making and fundraising across multiple projects in that same federal push. One questionable transaction can be explained away as coincidence. A portfolio of family-linked transactions across nearly $9 billion in public support is harder to wave off. Congressional investigators have moved past general ethics complaints that are now demanding the actual documentary record. Senators Elizabeth Warren, Ron Wyden, Chris Van Hollen, Richard Blumenthal, and Adam Schiff, joined by Representative Zoe Lofgren, sent letters seeking the transaction documents, records of meetings between Cantor Fitzgerald and Commerce officials, and proof that Lutnick complied with his recusal obligations. Their own language is notable. The lawmakers wrote that the arrangement raises, quote, serious questions about Secretary Lutnick's exposure to federal conflicts of interest and bribery laws, unquote. That's not just ethics committee language. It frames this as a question of possible legal exposure. And because Lutnick had already resisted earlier requests, the newer letters went directly to Cantor Fitzgerald and USA Rare Earth as well, a way to get the paper trail even if the department itself stays quiet. So what would actually settle this? The key documents are likely to include ethics agreements, recusal memoranda, calendars, briefing notes, term sheets, and the engagement contracts between USA Rare Earth and Cantor Fitzgerald. Those records would show who participated in selecting USAR when Cantor was in the room with Commerce, and whether the internal safeguards were actually followed. If the process was clean, the paper trail should show a real, meaningful separation between Commerce's decision makers and Cantor's compensated fundraising role. If it wasn't, the records may show overlap, pressure, or selective access that benefited entities tied to officials' own families. Zoom out. And the real question isn't whether rare earth mining should expand in the United States and ally countries. The real question is whether public industrial policy has been turned into a mechanism for channeling fees, equity upside, and strategic advantage toward the children of the officials overseeing that same policy. USA Rare Earth is the clearest flagship case, precisely because every element is out in the open. A massive public commitment, a linked private fundraising round, a placement agent controlled by the Secretary's own sons, a company that expanded rapidly right after getting federal backing, and congressional investigators now demanding records tied to conflicts of interest and possible bribery law exposure. Whether this turns out to be sharp-elbowed cronyism or something more prosecutable comes down to the documents Congress is now trying to force into the open. 6 lawmakers have asked. Cantor Fitzgerald and USA Rare Earth are on record with their defense. What isn't public yet is the actual paper trail, the calendars, the recusal memos, the engagement contracts. That's the story to watch. That's the Trump-Lutnick mining machine laid out end to end. The full written investigation and sourcing are linked below.